comes. Hello. Oh, it works. Hello, everyone. It is so great to see you all here. Welcome back. We're really excited to kick this year off. I'm Alicia Sands. I'm director of the Pritzker Fellows Program. And as you may or may not know, the fellows are here all quarter, leading conversations, holding office hours, and taking part in all kinds of IOP events. So students, they are here for you, to meet you, drop wisdom on you, argue respectfully and civilly with you. And we really hope you'll take advantage of their wisdom and expertise and sign up for their seminars and office hours. You can come once, you can come 40 times. There are no requirements, no homework, and you will always find interesting conversation. And tonight, after our moderated conversation, you'll have a chance to ask them some questions. And when we get to questions, I just ask that you wait until the mic comes to you. I think Teddy will be running the mics. And before I turn it over to our IOP director, David Axelrod, I just want to tell you about a few upcoming events. Tomorrow, please join us right back here in the backyard from 3 to 6 for Politipalooza, where you'll have a chance to meet a lot of students that are doing really cool things at the IOP and learn about our activities, grab some swag, grab some food, and make some new friends. And if you are interested in a paid academic year internship, on Friday at 12:30, there will be an info session in the IOP living room about our ACE and UPrep program. And if you don't know what those mean, you can learn more, and also you can apply on our career development page on our website. And on Monday, we are kicking off the year with a panel of young people who are making a difference outside of government. This will be moderated by former Pritzker Fellow Anna Galland, and we hope it will inspire you to start thinking about how you can have an impact. It's an amazing group of young folks. Thursday, we'll look at the midterm landscape with a panel of journalists, and please sign up for our newsletter, and you can learn about all the rest of the exciting events we've got this quarter. And now, a man who needs no introduction, David Axelrod.
But demands one. You know, all summer long I've been walking around here and I've been thinking, something's missing. Something's missing. And I realized it's students. It's so great to see you guys. I've been walking around the campus this weekend and just seeing young people all over this campus was invigorating. So I'm so happy to see you and to see you here. And you should be here because we've got such an extraordinary array of fellows here. And I'm just going to ask them to, I will introduce them. Got my paperwork here. And I want you each to talk a little bit about what you hope to achieve with your fellow seminars. And I may have a follow-up question, but I want to reserve plenty of time so that you can ask questions. Like I could chew up the whole time. I'm not going to do that. And I am going to ask these fellows to speak in the order of the distance they came to be part of this fellows program. And I do that for two reasons. It seems fair, because Rana came from across the world, and also because I've known Gutierrez for 40 years, and I know that once I turn the floor over to him, I may never get it back. So, Rana, Ayyub is an Indian investigative journalist and global opinions writer at the Washington Post. She's worked as a reporter, editor, and columnist with some of the leading publications in India and internationally. Rana's reported on religious violence, extrajudicial killings by the state, insurgency in Kashmir, terrorism by the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka, and authored an international bestseller, Gujarat Files, Anatomy of a Cover-Up, in which she describes what she describes as the complicity of Indian Prime Minister, now Indian Prime Minister Modi, in state-sponsored genocide in the year 2022. 2002. This is 2022, isn't it? Yes, it is, yeah. But yes, I misread that. Yes, no, I understand. I understand. Rana, talk a little bit about what you're going to do with your seminar.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm mildly jet lagged. I mean, I'm sufficiently caffeinated, but I am still jet lagged. This is my sleeping time in India. Um, um, I am going to talk about. I come from the world's largest democracy, and we are celebrating our 75th year of Indian independence. So, the stories that you get from India about India, besides the snake charmers and other stuff that you hear, it's also a country of Gandhi and Nehru, the freedom fighters who got us freedom from the Britishers. But it's a country whose story needs to be told and heard because it's a warning sign for the world and countries that are slipping swiftly into dictatorship and fascism across the globe, as we have been witnessing. The Indian story is a story that needs to be told as a warning about how democracies could slip into fascism as soon as citizens become complacent and we build a sense of victimhood amongst people. Our story is not very different from the story of America or other countries around the world. So that's something I think I'm going to discuss by and large, besides, of course, my own journey as a journalist, and, of course, other things Indian that you all would like to question and ask, and yeah.
The, and you say you're going to share your own story. You have endured quite a bit of intimidation, pressure, official, extra official. Talk about what the role of journalist is to you. Why is journalism, and Steve's down here, he probably has some views on this, why are journalists so important to a functioning, thriving democracy?
Well, David, this time when I was getting in at the Bombay airport, I was clearing immigration. I was not sure if I was going to clear immigration because I have been stopped twice earlier this year from boarding my flight because I was going to speak about democracies. So I have been stopped at the airport by the Indian government. Just 2 days ago, just before I was boarding my flight, I got summons from an Indian court for a story that I wrote in 2009. And the allegation against me, hold your breath, is that I'm a Muslim. That's the allegation on paper. So it is important for it is an increasingly unpopular profession. Journalists are important because we have to bear witness at a time when the lines between the oppressor and the oppressed are blurred, and we need to tell the world the stories of the oppressed, which the world leaders and dictators want to silence and intimidate us from telling. The kind of intimidation that I have faced, I've been called one of the 10 most threatened journalists in the world, and that's because I speak a truth that is unpalatable. Yesterday, India's foreign minister was in Washington, D.C., and without naming me, he said, an opinion writer of the Washington Post is trying to discredit India. And this is not the first time it has happened. When Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, was in India last year, 2 years ago, the Indian government didn't meet him, and one of the officials from the Indian government put out a tweet that when you hire jihadists, don't expect us to see you. Jihadist, of course, is a second name for me because I also happen, amongst other identities, I'm also a Muslim. So at this point of time, it is important for me to not just be a woman journalist or a woman of color, but also to be a Muslim woman and report on the stories of the marginalized that the world does not get to hear. I speak not just about what's happening in Ukraine, but I also speak about stories from Palestine, stories that need to be told, which are not told by the white press as much as they need to be told. So I would like to tell stories about what's happening to Palestinian women. I would like to tell the story about Shireen Abu Akleh, a journalist who was killed by the Israeli forces, a story that you do not really hear as much as you should be on campuses. So that's the reason why some of us disruptors are important in the present day and age.
Yeah. You know, I would just add that I think that the founders of our country understood that there needed to be independent scrutiny of government and the people who run them, and that a free press was an essential part of that. And every democracy is confronting that right now, and whether they're willing to stand up for that. But we look forward to I'm sure you'll have a lot of provocative discussions. It feels like you'll invite them.
I don't intend to, but I speak a truth which is
Nothing
quite
wrong with that.
unpopular. I speak a truth which is quite unpopular. So yeah, I might be provocative.
Well, we look forward to your seminars. Laura, speaking of snake charmers, you ran the U.S. Senate for many years. Let me share your biography. You devoted decades to service to the United States Senate, from your appointment as a Senate page in the 1980s to your election as the body's secretary for the majority, an officer of the Senate. You were nominated by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, elected unanimously by Republican conference, and ratified by the full Senate from 2013 until you retired in 2020. Doug Jones can talk about how central a role that is.
My whole seminar is going to be about Laura.
But, well, let's see what your seminar is going to be about. Doug, right?
Thank you.
No, I said her seminar is going to be about you.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be about bipartisanship, so it will be about you too. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really do want to persuade you all of the importance of the Senate and sit down and help figure out together how it's working, what happens behind the scenes, why it's so important, why the filibuster is such an important institution, and how really the Senate is, I would say, the only partial branch of government that is standing between us and some pretty undemocratic actions right now. And it's under siege, but it is a beautiful, important, really, really interesting institution. So I'm hoping we can spend some time where all of our guests are going to be working behind the scenes at the Senate, and we can unpack how it works, hear your ideas about why, some of the pieces that don't work, and maybe have some arguments about how beautiful it is to have this extremely inefficient, archaic, anachronistic, unique body. Because I love the Senate.
Yeah.
I do.
That's,
She doesn't love me back, but I do love it.
Yeah, I mean, I probably, even in this audience, there are varying views about the beauty of the filibuster.
Yeah.
But tell me, just give me just a minute on why you feel, and I'm sure you'll do many, many more minutes on this in your seminar.
Well, so
And I actually like to hear Doug react to it.
Yeah. So having lived through the 2013 through 2020 period, and having been in the Senate when Democrats had all three branches, it had House, Senate, and President, and when President Trump was president, and then the Republicans had the House and the Senate, and watching what the Senate did to force people towards the middle, to force them to come up with legislative proposals that were durable and bipartisan, and it's continuing to do that. The House doesn't do that. The House is entirely partisan and very, very rapid, and the Senate forces bipartisanship, and therefore the things that are passed through the Senate last a really long time. And I think it's important for our country to hold policymakers to account and say, you do have to talk to the other side, and you do have to understand what's important to them, and you do have to try to bridge that divide and come up with something that will last and that reflects the views of all of your constituents and not just whoever happens to have the speakership of the House.
So, Doug, I want to get into your bio and your seminar, but I just wanted you to react to that because, you were probably the most bipartisan of senators when you were there. Do you feel that the filibuster promotes that kind of cooperation?
I think it can. I'm not sure it always does. My problem with the filibuster right now, and by the way, I'm not an advocate for just bombing it and throwing it away, but I do think there needs to be some reform. I'm not sure it promotes that kind as much because it's just so damn perfunctory right now. Every vote is just everybody, you can phone in an objection, and the next thing you know, you got a certain amount of debate, and then you're going to have a closer vote, then you're going to have a regular vote, and I'm not sure it's
All 60, all requiring 60.
yes, all require 60, and well, except the final vote. Once you get to the 60, it just requires a majority vote. And I'm not sure it's functioning the way it was really started out and intending to function. And I think there ought to be some rules that make people hold the floor a little bit. Some people call it a talking filibuster. I'm not sure I like that term, but I think that it has a place. I don't disagree with Laura at all that it's got a place, and it's historically had a place. I just don't think it's functioning that way right now. And I don't think it functions in a way that it fosters as much bipartisanship, because if you really look back, at least the time that I was there and in the last year and a half, only those bills, standalone bills, that had real interest. Infrastructure has had an interest, bipartisan interest for years. The CHIPS bill, bipartisan interest. Only those make it. Everything else ends up getting tacked on to a must-have, an appropriations bill, the NDAA. So she's going to do a whole program on keeping the filibuster. I'm going to probably find somebody who wants to nuke it, although I won't take that complete position.
And as
We'll do
usual, you'll be right in the middle. Huh?
yeah, and I'll be right in the middle. As my old boss, Howell Heflin, who was from Alabama, used to say, I got friends on the right and friends on the left, and so I'm going to vote with my friends.
Doug, for those of you who don't know him, was, before he became a United States Senator, a celebrated prosecutor who brought long overdue justice to the victims of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing of 1963. You'll remember that was the tragic bombing of 4 young African-American girls in a church in Birmingham, not 10 miles from where you grew up. And decades and decades later, he brought 2 of the bombers to justice as a U.S. attorney. In 2017, he shocked the political establishment by winning a special election to fill a U.S. Senate seat in Alabama, the first Democrat to do so in 25 years. On Capitol Hill, he quickly built a reputation as a well-regarded and effective legislator, passing more than 24 bipartisan bills into law in just 3 years. And he most recently served as a Sherpa in the Supreme Court confirmation and process. And you should talk about that. Shepherding President Biden's nomination through the Senate, a historic nomination. Talk to me about what you want to cover in your seminar.
We're going to talk about a lot of present-day politics. I want to talk about the midterms. I want to talk about what's going on in the country. I want to talk about the fact that while India may be the world's largest democracy, I'm really scared that the United States of America is the fastest country losing democracy right now. I want to talk about the state of democracy in the context of the midterms and where we are. We're going to talk about that some. I'm going to talk a little bit about where I got to the U.S. Senate, how I got there, because I think I'm somewhat of a unicorn, a mythical creature that they call a Democrat in the Deep South. And it was an interesting ride to get where I got. But I also want to talk about some of the really significant things that are happening across this country. January 6th, the findings of the committee, what that means for folks. I want to tie that into investigations that are going on that involve a former president of the United States that are really both historic in the sense that they've never, ever happened like this, and consequential, and try to answer some questions, because as a former DOJ guy, I can talk a little bit about the policies, the procedures. One of the things I want to do, I'm traveling around, I want to talk with a lot of candidates these days, and I want to get some feedback. Sometimes even when you are out there and you're trying to work with candidates and you're campaigning, you're still in this silo, you're still in this kind of bubble. And I want to kind of hear from folks. I want to learn a little bit while I'm here, especially because, quite frankly, one of the things I'm seeing is that young people are not voting in the numbers that they
I know, that's why I'm
supposed
wearing
to
this
do.
sweatshirt. Here,
Well, I'm
my
sure
vote-
that
I'm wearing my vote sweatshirt here.
And I'm sure if we could just get everybody wearing David's sweatshirt, we would have much greater numbers voting.
It's big enough I could fit a bunch of people in here.
So I'm gonna learn. I want to hear from what's going on with some really smart people about what they're perceiving with this country, with the elections and with democracy. And Laura and I are going to do. She's going to do a pro-filibuster class. I'm going to do the following week an anti-filibuster class. We're going to talk about the South. And then the last class, we'll break down the midterms and kind of look in a crystal ball about 2024 and what folks are thinking.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to all you guys speak, the more I can hear you speak together, I think the more I'll enjoy. You're all going to be great, but every one of you has insights into all of these subjects. And Steve Hayes, you are a very, very well-known conservative journalist. Wrote for the Weekly Standard for what, decades?
20 years.
20 years.
I know I don't look that old.
Yeah, yeah. He artificially grays his hair just to
look distinguished.
affect the notion of yes, experience and perspective. But you've written several important books, and now you've started the Dispatch. At a very interesting time, in which conservatism, what conservatism actually is a very active debate. So tell us what you plan to do with your seminar.
Yeah, I think there's a theme to a certain extent. I'm very interested in exploring some of the same subjects that we've heard from each of the three people who have spoken so far, but from through a slightly different lens. I'm interested in looking at what is the role of a journalist today? What does a journalist do today that's different than what a journalist did, say, 50 years ago, when the emphasis was telling people what happened? Well, that's not really that necessary anymore. You can watch what's happening in real time on your phone, pretty much any political event that of consequence. I want to talk about what the implications are on that for our democracy, for our ability to get along, to have discussions, to come up with the tools that allow us to debate on contentious issues where we might not agree. I'm very interested in exploring the idea that people are now, and I would say this is particularly true of people on the center right, are looking at journalism and consuming media much less these days for information and much more these days for affirmation, so that they can watch and nod their heads along rather than be challenged and have to think through, grapple with some of these difficult issues. So I'm thrilled to be here, excited to have these discussions, and really interested and excited to learn from you all, from anybody who shows up at the seminars, to take in what you're hearing, what you're observing, what your own media consumption habits are, and to talk through where we've been, sort of where we are now, and where this is all headed.
Yeah, and just apropos to hearing from all these guys, Doug, you raised the point about young people and disillusionment with the political system. I think it's really important for us to hear from you guys as to what the sources of that disillusionment are, because there are plenty of reasons to be disillusioned. And the question is, what is the best strategy? Is it to withdraw or is it to engage? And, I have a bias in this regard. I think it's absolutely essential for you guys to engage, but I recognize that may take some convincing. So that'll be, but to one point I wanted to sort of take just a small issue with, when you said you don't really need to report stuff because everybody can see what's going on. There are large swaths of, first of all, there's just a flood of stuff, and that makes it hard. There's so much available that it's really hard to know exactly what's going on or where to go to find out what's going on. But there are large swaths of this country where local newspapers used to play a really vigorous role. I speak now as a former reporter for the once great Chicago Tribune. But there's towns that have no newspaper anymore, no local source of information. And bad things happen when there's no one to shine a bright light in dark corners. I just wanted to.
Yeah, we're agreeing rather than disagreeing, but I think
Well,
I
that's no fun.
must have misspoken, not for the first time and certainly not for the last. No, I mean, I think it's more necessary, in some ways, it's more necessary than ever to have that reporting, rather than just take in what's available by watching, something on your phone as it plays out live. And the Dispatch, the company that it's almost 3 years old, that we founded, was founded in part on the principles of old school journalism and reporting and putting facts first and seeking the truth at a time when, again, I think in particular on the center right, that's a little bit out of vogue. I mean, there are plenty of good conservative journalists, plenty of outlets that employ these good conservative journalists who do good work, but there are also a lot of places. It's a very crowded space on the center right, media outlets that are prone to shouting and prone to being bold and outrageous and provocative. And there's nothing wrong with being provocative if it's to a point or if it's in pursuit of the truth. But being provocative for the sake of being provocative and to outrage people so that you can monetize their clicks, that's a problem.
And that is the challenge of modern media, sort of modern politics as well. Outrage sells. Outrage gets clicks. Outrage raises campaign contributions. Why is Marjorie Taylor Greene one of the superior fundraisers in the Republican Party? It isn't because of her massive legislative achievements. It's because she spurs outrage. Let me move on to my friend Luiz Gutierrez, who is sort of a legend here in Chicago politics and very much in the tradition of Chicago politics, which is energetic, challenging, fun, and passionate. And I met him, I think when I was a reporter at the Tribune, Luiz was challenging Dan Rostenkowski, who was then a towering figure in national politics as well as local Democratic politics I guess it was for ward committeemen, which is actually a very powerful, or was then a very powerful role in our politics. He went on to win a seat in the city council that ended what was called council wars when we had our first black mayor, Harold Washington, and a white majority kind of seized control of the council and took control from the mayor, and Luiz and another aldermanic candidate got elected in a special election. It was Chewie, right?
Yes.
Chewie Garcia, who's now in Congress, succeeded Luiz and tipped the balance in favor of Mayor Washington. And then he went to Congress. And I know I'm kind of rambling, but I love the story. Luiz comes from the north side of Chicago. He's Puerto Rican. And we had a very sharp division among our Hispanic communities in Chicago between the Mexican-American community in the south, the Puerto Rican community in the north. They were united in a district. And Luiz became in Congress the leading advocate for comprehensive immigration reform, a role he played for 2 decades. So there's a lot to talk about, his own journey, but also an issue that we continue to grapple with today. So I figured I'd give you a lengthy introduction so that you can give a shorter recitation of what you're going to do.
Thank you, David. And I'm really honored and privileged to be with my fellow fellows. And thank you for inviting me, David, and
Thank you
extending me
for
this
being with us.
distinction. We're going to talk about a lot of things. I want to talk about the last colony that exists, that's Puerto Rico. It's our responsibility as a nation that fought as 13 colonies against British rule to free Puerto Rico and to allow it to self-determine its future. It's a colony of the United States of America. And if you don't believe that, just watch what happens as you see this last hurricane and the hurricane before that. We are not able to make our own decisions. We are controlled by a fiscal control board that Congress said they could impose upon us because Puerto Rico belongs to, but it's not a part of the United States of America. And that's the Supreme Court of the United States. That's something that's wrong. We need to fix that as a democracy. I want to talk about immigration, as David said. I think I want to talk about immigration, but I want to hear how people see it and then try to enhance, right, immigration in its true light. Why? Because we're all in this together. And to me, civil rights and the 11 million undocumented is the civil rights issue of our moment. 11 million people who work, most of whom have been here, most of those 11, been here over 20 years. There's 7 million American citizen children that are their moms and dads and don't have papers, and they have to fear every day if they're going to lose their mom and dad. That's something that we should fix. And that it's not just Latinos. 1 out of 10 immigrants in this country is black. Let me say that again. 1 out of 10 immigrants in this country is black. And people look at me and they say, really, Gutierrez? I said, did you figure out where the Vice President of the United States, mom and dad were born? Don't you remember where Barack Obama's dad was born? Why should that surprise you? And what is also surprising is that there should be more interconnection between the immigrant communities. 80,000 Dominican-born citizens of the United States in the last census checked off black as their race. So when you talk about these issues, you should talk about the intersectionality that exists, a lot of times that exists among people of color and how they see themselves. And to end, look, David, I started because Epton put up a poster that said, vote for Epton before it's too late. Mm-hmm. And for me, that meant before a black person moves on.
This was Harold Washington's Republican opponent.
1983, first black mayor of the city of Chicago is elected, Harold Washington, his opponent's campaign, vote for me, Epton, before it's too late. And I said to myself, you know, there were swimming pools I couldn't go to. There were neighborhoods I had to fear walking into. I am freer today because black people gave up their lives for voting rights and for civil rights. And I couldn't sit at my house, David, and watch Epton on the basis of before it's too late run a campaign. I had to walk out of my house and challenge that system because I felt that I was standing on shoulders of so many black people, and as the senator knows, were murdered during the civil rights movement. And that's why I got to go to Congress, because of the Voting Rights Act. David, you remember the special election? What did Harold Washington say? When you go to court, Mayor, what's the city of Chicago going to say in the discrimination suit of the Voting Rights Act? And what did the mayor? He had one word: we're going to plead guilty because we are. That was such brilliance, right? Mm-hmm. So I was right? Because you saw how the mayor responded. And we stand, and today we have to challenge the system. And so I want to talk about all of those things and how we get all of the youth involved and invigorated.
Let me just ask you two things. And I knew I could draw you out. Let me ask you a couple of things. One is on Puerto Rican independence, and this has been a position you've held as long as I've known you. But there have been several votes on the island, and they haven't voted for independence. So how do you reconcile your position and that?
Well, I guess everybody should read Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, and you would understand the colonial mentality and what that does and how perverted it is. When you teach a population that they are small, that they have no natural resources, that they would wither away and die if it wasn't for their big brother in the North, if that's what you teach, if the superstructure of a society in its news, in its educational system, teaches you self-hatred and a lack of self-worth, well, I guess it's kind of hard to talk about independence, isn't it? Because that is what tells you. David, when my dad was 20 years old and he put a Puerto Rican flag up in the air, that was an act of sedition in Puerto Rico. We also had our Smith Act in Puerto Rico, La Ley de la Mordaza, that said carrying a Puerto Rican flag, right, was an act of sedition. Those are the kinds of steps that have taken us today. But let me just say to everybody, in this last election, there were two candidates, both of them for candidates for governor, David, for in two different parties, the Independence Party and the New Party. And between the two of them, they got 30% of the vote. And the governor got 31% of the vote. So if there's a fusion between those two candidates, all I'm saying, David, is things are changing, and young people have changed it.
And just the second thing I wanted to ask you was on immigration, because obviously it's in the news, you know, again, partly because of the things that you know, the governors of Texas and Florida have done. But there is an issue, and you know, you were, I said, an advocate for comprehensive immigration reform. Doesn't it all have to be of a piece? Shouldn't we move forward on all of these things so people have faith that the system's working, the asylum system, the immigration system, that you deal with the status of these 11 million and so on?
I want to have that conversation with the students.
Okay.
I want to hear what they have to say about it. And I'm going to try to not use the approach of comprehensive immigration reform, because, David, I have to tell you, when I talk to immigrants today that are undocumented, you know what they tell me? They tell me, Gutierrez, I'd love to vote. I'd love to be an American citizen. Thank you for fighting so that I have all the same rights you do. But what I need is I need a work permit so I can raise these kids and not be separated from them, so that I can grow old with my wife. Get me some papers. And you know what the second thing they say right after that? And don't worry, my kids will remember how badly I was treated. So don't you worry about voting, okay? My kids will grow up and they will change America, but let me raise them. Now, that's controversial, right? Getting somebody without American citizenship. But the Congress of the United States does nothing, and there is no leadership. And I have challenged the Hispanic Congressional Caucus because it is not spoken up. And I'm sorry, when there's one senator from West Virginia that has more power than 37 Latino members of the House of the Senate, I got to tell you, there's something wrong with the way that's functioning. And I want to have a discussion and a debate about it.
Why are you picking on Senator Capito like that? Anyway, I want to turn to the audience, and Teddy has a microphone here. If you guys have questions, someone needs to be the first person to ask one. And there's, oh yeah, here we go. Teddy, you pick them so I don't antagonize anybody.
My name is Gabriel. I'm a second year in the college. My question's for Senator Jones. As an Alabamian myself, I found it quite easy to not care about politics, being a liberal in a very conservative state. And I was wondering, and your election was the first time I ever cared or paid attention to any political election besides vaguely presidential elections. And so I was wondering how you managed to get so many people who are the political minority in the state to come out and vote and make their voices heard.
First of all, thank you for being who you are from Alabama. We can have a caucus, just the two of us, with my wife, Luiz. First of all, and David and I kind of had this conversation earlier about being authentic and who you are. And I ran in part because I wanted to give a voice to a lot of people in Alabama had not had a voice In Alabama, so many of the Democrats that tried to run for office tried to be Republican light. They were trying to get these really conservative evangelical votes that they were never going to get. And I wanted to make sure that folks in the, Alabama still got a pretty good Democratic base, about 40%, but those folks had not had a voice. And I wanted to make sure that I presented a voice. As it turned out, that voice got stronger as the campaign went on. It got stronger because I was running against a really bad guy, okay, in Roy Moore. So I was able, because I was able to be pretty authentic about things, but also going to where people are and not trying to just completely talk down to them, preach to them, or do whatever. I went to where people are and tried to have a dialogue with them. And that brought in a lot of independents who had not voted for Democrats before. It brought in a lot of moderate Republicans who crossed that Rubicon to vote for a Democrat for the first time. And so we really were able to build a good bit. We thought that, candidly going into the race, it was a special election. We were the only game in town. We thought that if we could just get out that base Democratic vote, we would win. As it turned out, the race became so national. It had so many things. We ended up having a lot more people voting, so we really had to work. But we didn't change the tactic. We didn't change who I was. We didn't change what we were saying. But we gave a lot of people a lot of hope that had not had that hope in a long time. And that's what drew people out in record numbers, especially the black turnout. And at some point in the seminar, David, I'll need to tell you about a conversation I had that Luiz and I had with Barack Obama about having a higher black percentage vote than he got. And he just put me in my place very quickly about a couple of things. But that's how...
He's competitive.
Oh, he's competitive. It was so funny as hell. But that's kind of how we really put that all together. But the key to me was being who I was, believing in what I believed, and telling folks that, look, we can find common ground, but if we can't and you can't vote for me, that's fine. Just, vote anyway. But if you want somebody that'll work with you and not just go my way or the highway, but somebody will work with you, listen to you, and try to get things done for everybody, then I would appreciate your vote.
I got to 3 years later, you lost by a substantial margin, and you did. You performed in the Senate just as you promised to. You took some hard votes. You voted your conscience and so on. Tell a young man why he should still stay engaged despite that.
Yeah, because look, even today, that people around this country remember that election, and it gave people hope. And they understand that I was probably going to be there only for a short period of time. But they also understood that every vote matters, and that we had so many people coming out at the time and getting engaged for the very first time in politics and understanding the policy and talking to people and making sure that they were making a difference. Yeah, I got beat in 2020, but we still made a difference that exists today in Alabama. You can't tell it by necessarily who's running for office today, but it's there. There's an underlying current that's still out there, and this is long ball. This is a long-term strategy. It's a long-term game to change Alabama, to change a lot of the South. I really think a lot of the demographics are moving our way, but you can't change it overnight. But we do it for everybody else, and it is incredibly important that people not get discouraged. I couldn't say this when I was running in 2020. I was running it as an incumbent, but I could not say that, look, it's important to vote and get engaged, even if your candidate loses. I couldn't say that because I would basically...
Yeah, that would have been bad.
Yeah, it would be admitting that I was going to lose. But it is because you make a difference. We made a difference in how folks look at issues in Alabama. We still do. And it doesn't always make the change, but those changes are coming. So stay engaged.
Teddy, I can't believe he passed all of you up.
Hi, I'm Prerna. I'm a graduate student at the Social Sciences Division in the IR program. So my question is to Mr. Hayes and Ms. Ayyub. Basically, both of you are journalists, but very different kinds. Ms. Ayyub is currently battling the conservative state media, a lot of state repressive measures in India to write what is the truth, what should be written, while you were trying to battle for ideas that could potentially are potentially harmful to communities that are marginalized, or those ideas are being used as bastions to promote some kind of inequality and marginalization. So I just want to understand, like, how do you like reconcile with both of these, and whether
When Luiz was speaking about not being able to use the pool decades ago, Luiz, we are going through that churn right now, where both my brothers, my eldest brother is the publisher of Condé Nast. I mean, he resigned 3 years ago, and a younger brother who works for a Cosmopolitan setup. Both of them had to leave their respective apartments and Cosmopolitan setups in some of the most expensive areas in Bombay, the financial capital of the country, because the residents of the building were uncomfortable with the only Muslim family staying there. So this apartheid that you were talking about 40, 50 years ago in the civil rights movement, that's something we are living in today. So I don't know about, Steve might have a different perspective, and, we spoke about being provocative. The thing is, there is a truth that is being spoken in India and the world that is being spoken for decades, that does not reflect on the modern ground reality of India. The Economist cover and the Time magazine cover of India that I have been reading over the decades talks about the India growth story and a nation that is growing. You guys know nothing about India. And I need to say this, there is a great deal of indifference. You're obsessed with the white world. So there is absolutely no understanding about the non-white world. And that's the only truth that I know, a truth that I need to tell the world, a truth that needs to be known. I speak also about the Muslim issue, which is we are the 220 million Muslims in India, the third largest population in the world. When that community is being discriminated and on the verge of a genocide, I will speak about it. I don't know what is the other side to the story, because I know only one side, and that's the oppression. Steve might want to speak about the other side of the story.
Steve.
Wait, as the oppressor? Wait a second. This is not what I signed up for. No, I mean, it's an interesting and provocative question. I thank you for it. It won't come as any surprise to you that I don't think I was enabling voices to marginalize people. I believe in free minds, free markets. I think that free markets would do a better job than a top-down, government-mandated system like we've seen fail throughout the world again and again and again. So those are the kinds of arguments I've made. It's coming from a totally different perspective. I mean, obviously, this is a different kind of diversity, but, and I want to make clear, I'm not putting myself in the place or in any way analogizing my experience to the things that Luiz and Rana have talked about. But I think conservatives generally, from an ideological perspective, from a philosophical perspective, have been underrepresented in the media. And I went to Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism, and they asked you, they have like a Facebook. I mean, this is actually before Facebook was Facebook, but a printed thing that was like a mini yearbook, and they asked you a question, what do you want to do? What's your goal here and as a journalist? And I said, to ask all of the questions, to ask questions from a variety of different points of view. And that's sort of what I got into journalism to do. Now, my experience at Columbia was very interesting. There were 252 students in my class, in the graduate school class, and there was one other open conservative in the class. Now, not everybody else was a hard-charging leftist. There were plenty of those, and I had a great time debating them over beer and wings, off campus. But, in my view, there's a reason that so many center-right people in the country became disaffected by the mainstream media, and I think it's a real problem. And while I certainly part company with a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in center-right media today, I think any path forward has to grapple with the idea that conservatives didn't pay attention. They tuned out the mainstream media because they thought that their views were mischaracterized, misunderstood, misrepresented. And I think it's important that that not happen again. I don't think we have a good path out of this unless you get center-right people in the country to buy in again.
But there is a common thread here, which is if you have leaders who try and discredit journalists and discredit reporting because truths are inconvenient, that's dangerous for democracies. And that is a go-to tactic for authoritarian leaders. It goes to the point I was trying to make at the beginning about the essentiality of a free press. Teddy, grab somebody, will you? We got time for four more questions.
My name's Lindsay. I'm a grad student in the computational analysis public policy. My question's for Ms. Dove. So much data has shown that we're almost as polarized as ever. I'm not saying the Democratic Party doesn't have its divisions, but I want to know your take on what the post-Trump era has done to the Republican Party, and if there's any turning back of these districts that need representatives that need the Trump endorsement, and if there's any room for moderate Republicans anymore.
And is this why you retired?
No, this is going to take me right back to the beauty of the Senate, because I mean, you look at the House and you look at the gerrymandered districts in the House, and you look at, I mean, the extreme polarization of where most of these people are running from and who they think they're representing, and they're doing it every 2 years, so it never stops. And then you come to the relative calm of the Senate, where it's a whole state, and I mean, you can read the coverage, you can watch it. The Republican Senate is not in the grip of Donald Trump nearly to the extent that the House is. I don't know if you'd agree with this.
No, I agree now. I want to wait till after the midterms.
Yeah. It's just not. It's an entirely different proposition. I don't think that the fear level is there really at all. I don't think you can disagree with me, and I think that the polarization of are you making faces?
No.
And I think the polarization in the House on both sides has made it really hard to govern, because everything is so, if you're running to the political left or you're running to the political right. I mean, John Boehner trying to figure out how to fund the wall and then getting run out of town, and then Speaker Ryan trying to figure out how to fund the wall and then getting run out of town. I mean, it was really hard. It's really hard in the House to come up with a governing strategy, and it's much less challenging in the Senate. And so I think the future of the Republican Party, I think, runs right through the U.S. Senate and what they're doing now, which is keeping their head down, trying to ignore the noise, and trying to get things done.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Marco. I'm a student at the School of Business, and my question is for Rana Ayyub. First of all, thank you for your important work. I was hoping that you could give some international perspective on America's, in the literal sense, anti-democratic structures, as in the Electoral College, gerrymandering, the Senate itself, with California is 75 times bigger than Wyoming, and both get 2 senators. These are practices that other countries, other successful democracies don't seem to adopt for some reason. So what does it mean for our credibility among the international community when we are governed by the minority so much of the time?
I'm still trying to get that question.
Yeah, the question is, we have a particular system here, an electoral college, so
Yeah.
we don't elect presidents by popular vote. In this last election, Joe Biden got 7 million more votes than Donald Trump, but won by the margin of 3 states that he carried by like 41,000 votes total because of the way the Electoral College is set up. Every state has 2 senators.
Yes, I missed the minority bit there.
Well, his point, and if I'm misstating it, correct me, is that it gives a lot of authority to the smaller states and overall would be a minority of the country because we aggregate. Well, I don't want to I could wonk out here, and you're jet lagged. I'll put you right to sleep.
No, not at all. Yes, we do. There is unbridled power to a lot of people who are ruling. For instance, in India, we do not have an electoral college. We are a democracy on paper, but there is space for changes because we have a prime minister who, by unpopular opinion, I'm not allowed to call him a fascist, but I think I should call him a fascist, has been in power for 2 terms now, and he's going to, his second term is going to end in 2 years, and he's going to aspire for a 3rd term and a 4th term. And if not, then he will place somebody who is not an elected leader in a position of power. So despite calling ourselves a democracy, we still have a lot of work that needs to be done. Our constitution was written to protect every single citizen of the country. It's a beautiful constitution if you have the time to go and read. But it is one thing to write a constitution, and it's another to actually adopt it in principle. My constitution, my democracy is a beautiful thing, but the people who are ruling it are ruining it, and which is why some of us end up being provocative and disruptors, despite that not being my nature. I mean, I can be an introvert, but in spaces like this, I can be a disruptor because you see a narrative being spoken about, a dominant thing. I mean, we were speaking about Fox News earlier. You have one Tucker Carlson, we have hundreds back home. Honestly, you watch news, you have one Fox News, you have one. I mean, I was listening to Steve. Steve, no offense, absolutely, but you know, this.
You already called them an oppressor.
No, she spoke about 2 different narratives. I said, okay, this is mine, and that's it. That didn't mean that he's an oppressor. But there is a,
Thanks.
despite being, you're welcome. So
I love the way you're getting along.
Despite the mainstream media in India, which is completely compromised, they have the hegemony, they still feel victims in their own country. So when one of us liberal voices speak out, they say, you know why liberals are not famous? Because far too long our voices have been silenced. We are not being heard. The reason why we are where we are today is because we allowed these centrists and people who do not differentiate between the oppressor and the oppressed to hold the moral compass of the nation. I mean, we will discuss more about this in our seminar because this is going to be just
I'm getting. Yeah, and I will say there's a skill that the practicing politicians understand, which is how to take a question and repurpose it for your own use. And I know you're a journalist, but you'd be a hell of a politician.
I've been told that earlier.
Next, I'll take one more question, and then we've got to wrap up.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Tara. I'm a grad student in the social work school, and my question's also for Rana. I was hoping to hear some of your thoughts on what's currently happening in Iran.
Look at the clock.
Yeah, I did see the clocks. You know, my views on Iran in my country are being used to attack me and my family. So what's happening in Iran has no place in civil society, has no place in religion, has no place in Islam, has no place in a democratic setup, has no place in the world order. So I'm outraged, and I stand up with every Iranian woman. And I said it when a lot of Indian media said, oh, you speak for the rights of hijabi women in India. Why aren't you silent on Iran? I said, I will speak for the right of a woman to not wear the hijab, and I will also speak for the right of a woman to wear the hijab if she does. What's happening in Iran and what's happening in India, our women's bodies are being used as playgrounds for bigots to practice their fascist politics. You get the story about what's happening in Iran. I really do wish you also know what's happening with the Muslim women in India right now. As I talk, there is a hearing going on in the Supreme Court in which all the judges are men, all the lawyers are men who are discussing whether a woman should wear a hijab or not wear a hijab. So that's where I am on Iran and India, both, if that answers your question.
No, you were great. No, that was very good. Well, listen, we are so excited to have you. And I just want to say that, it's hard for me to pick one aspect of the Institute of Politics that I love the most, because every single program has real value for students who participate in it. But the Fellows Program is really an extraordinary one, because you get a chance to sit in small groups with these great practitioners, passionate advocates, experienced politicians, experienced administrators of political institutions, journalists, and learn from them and provoke them to learn from you. And so I hope that you'll come and spend a lot of time over the next quarter with all of them, and develop relationships with them. I guarantee you it will be a rewarding experience both ways. And I just want to thank all of you for making possible. Every quarter, we've been blessed with wonderful, wonderful fellows who were willing to share their time and the value of their experience with us. And this is such a stellar group, and such a, broad, diverse, interesting group, that I think we're going to have a great quarter. So thank you very much, and thank you very much.
Thank you.